The cold rain was falling on my hands again. I knelt behind a small folding table outside the train station, 4 lemon pies lined up in neat rows, and I watched the commuters stream past without looking at me. I was 24 years old. My name was Naomi Carter, and for 3 years I had been living in a studio apartment above a dry cleaner on Long Street, baking pies in an oven older than I was. I sold them at this same corner every weekday since I was 21. 3 years of knuckles split by citrus. 3 years of being invisible in plain sight. My father's family, his mother, Loretta Boyd, and her 2 grown sons, Marcus and Terrence, had made sure of that. When my father died during my 2nd year of college, leaving a small insurance check and a handwritten letter I was never allowed to read, his mother told the entire family I had stolen the money and run. They believed her. They were always going to believe her. I never needed her approval to know who my father was. My father, James Carter, was a quiet man who had worked as a custodian at Whitfield Community College for 19 years. He had been married briefly to my mother, Diane, who died of breast cancer when I was 6. He raised me alone in a small 2-bedroom house on Maple Avenue, the same house his own sister Loretta had grown up hating. Loretta had never forgiven him for marrying Diane, who had come from a family Loretta considered too particular about silverware and cloth napkins at the dinner table. After my mother died, Loretta told anyone who would listen that James had mistreated her. She told my teachers. She told the deacons at her church. My father said nothing. He cooked dinner, helped me with my reading, paid the bills on time, and went to work every morning at 5. That was the world I grew up in. Every Sunday, Loretta would come to dinner with her 2 sons and stay late enough to remind me that I was a problem my father should not have inherited. The first time I remember hearing it clearly, I was 9. She had come to pick up Marcus and Terrence, and as she walked down the porch, she said to my father, in a voice just loud enough for me to hear, "Some people should not have been allowed to keep children." I stood on the other side of the screen door. My father did not turn around. He said, "Good night, Loretta." That is the only memory I have of him raising his voice. When I was 16, my father sat me down at the kitchen table one evening and said he had begun setting aside small bonds for my college. He showed me the folder. 12 envelopes in a green accordion file. Each one had my name written on the front in his careful handwriting. He had been putting $5 a week into them since I was 3. He said they were for me. He said he wanted me to go somewhere. "I am going somewhere, Naomi," he said. "I want you to go further." He died 6 years later, in March of my sophomore year, while I was in my dorm room studying for an exam I cannot remember now. The phone call came from the hospital at 11 at night. I drove 90 minutes to be there. By the time I arrived, he had been gone an hour. Loretta was already in the waiting room with Marcus and Terrence. She did not look at me. She asked the nurse if there were any papers for her to sign. I was 21 years old, and I had just become invisible in my own family. Not long after, the family held a service at Whitfield Memorial Chapel on a Saturday afternoon. I was not told about it. I learned of it 3 days afterward, when a neighbor named Mrs. Whitfield, no relation to the chapel, found me sitting on the back steps of my father's now empty house. She was the only person who asked me how I was. She had made me a small cup of tea. She had sat with me through an entire afternoon without asking me a single question. When she finally spoke, she said, "You ought to know that the service was held on Tuesday." Marcus read the eulogy. Terrence carried the casket. Your name was not in the program. She paused. There was no mention of you. I stared at her. She did not look away. I didn't go because I was told not to come, I said. Who told you? Aunt Loretta, through Marcus. Mrs. Whitfield set down her cup. That is not right, Naomi. Not to her, I said. That winter, I packed a single duffel bag and moved 3 hours north into a city I had never lived in. I rented the smallest studio I could afford above a dry cleaner on Long Street. The oven in the kitchen had been there since 1979. The window had a draft I could not fix. The bathtub had a rust ring I learned to live with. I took a job as a hostess at a small diner 4 nights a week, and I taught myself to bake pies from a used cookbook I had bought at a thrift store for $2. I made my first sale on a Tuesday morning in February. A woman stopped at my small table outside the train station because her daughter liked lemon meringue. She paid me $8 for a single slice. She asked for my name. She came back the next week and ordered a whole pie. That winter cost me $41. I kept baking. The first year was the hardest. There were weeks when I had to choose between flour and the electric bill. There were mornings when I did not eat until my first customer arrived. There was one night in April when I sat on the corner of the studio and wrote out the math of closing on a paper napkin. And I almost closed on that napkin. I put it away. I kneaded dough at 2 in the morning until my hands stopped shaking. There was another night, a few months later, when a regular customer, an older man who worked the night shift at the depot, left a $5 bill folded under an empty tin and did not say a word. There was a Sunday afternoon that spring when I sat on my small fire escape with a bowl of tomato soup that Jolene's mother had sent over, and I watched the city lights come on 1 block at a time, and I did not cry. By the second year, a wedding planner named Rachel had ordered 40 pies for a single summer weekend. A coffee house 4 blocks over had begun ordering 8 pies a week. I had moved my table to better corners. I had started a small ledger of names. I had begun writing the day of the week on each pie box in soft pencil. I had bought a second oven, used, from a bakery that was closing on Elm Street, and I had paid for it in 3 installments. By the third year, I had 2 employees, Jolene, who could roll pie crust in her sleep, and Sam, who handled the deliveries in a borrowed station wagon. We were not rich. We were not famous. We were working. We had earned the right to call our hours our own. I still baked every morning before the others arrived, because the kitchen was the only room in my life where I could think clearly. One Thursday in November, a woman in a long wool coat stopped at my train station table and asked for a slice of lemon meringue. She spoke gently. She had kind eyes. She paid me $40 for it, 20 too many. And when I tried to give her the change, she waved me off. She asked my name. She asked where I was from. She asked about my father. I told her his name. I told her he had been a custodian at Whitfield Community College. I told her he had died 5 years before. She went very still. "James Carter," she said quietly. "You are his daughter." I nodded. "My husband has been looking for him for almost 20 years, she said. "His name is Benjamin Haynes. He runs a small building materials company you may have heard of. He was a runaway kid once. He spent a winter in the basement of that same college. Your father brought him food when no one else would. He lent him a wool blanket from his own closet. He told him where the shelter was. He did not ask for anything in return. He told my husband that night. My husband still remembers the words. He told him, "You were going somewhere, young man. Don't stop." I sat down on the curb beside my table. "Mr. Haynes spent almost 20 years trying to find him," Margaret said. "6 months before your father died, he finally located him through an old Union steward. He had begun writing letters. He had been preparing to come and see him in person. He did not make it in time. He has never stopped grieving that he did not make it in time." I did not speak for a long while. "There is something else," Margaret said. She reached into her coat and handed me a sealed envelope, heavy with paper. "This belongs to you." Inside, there was a check drawn on the Haynes Family Foundation for $100,000, dated 5 years earlier, and never cashed. Beneath it, a sealed second envelope made out in my father's handwriting. "For Naomi." I could not open it that day. I sat on the curb and held the envelope in both hands. I did not understand it yet. I only understood that my father's handwriting was real, and that his voice had not been entirely lost. A few weeks later, I made the decision to face the family. I invited Aunt Loretta, Marcus, Terence, and Mr. Haynes to a meeting at the office of a young attorney I had retained, Rachel Whitfield, no relation to Mrs. Whitfield. I did not tell Loretta what the meeting was about. I told her only that I had questions about my father's estate and that there would be a witness. On the morning of the meeting, it was raining softly. I wore a simple black dress I had sewn myself the year before. I brought only the envelope and a small ledger of debts my father had been owed by his neighbors. $612 across 7 names, all of which Loretta had quietly collected after his death. I had written each name down in a careful column. When they arrived, Marcus wore a pressed blue shirt. Terence wore a tie he had clearly borrowed. Loretta wore her church hat. I did not look at her. I did not need to. Mr. Haynes introduced himself to the room. He was a tall, gentle man with silver hair and old eyes. He thanked Loretta for coming. He thanked Marcus and Terence. He did not thank them for anything in particular, and that was enough. Then he asked me to open the second envelope. Inside, there was my father's letter. It had been written 18 days before his death. It named his small insurance check. It named his savings bonds, the same green accordion file I had been shown at 16. It named the modest union pension that ought to have been mine. It named the list of neighbors who owed him small sums. And it named Mr. Haynes as the witness he had asked to verify his wishes when his time came. Mr. Haynes had honored that request. He had held the letter for 5 years because he had been told by my father himself that I was to receive it only when I had built enough of my own life to know the difference between his gift and my own. The room went quiet. Loretta, for the first time in my life, did not speak. She looked down at her hands. Marcus looked away. Terence cleared his throat and then stopped. I wasn't there to fight. I wasn't there to argue. I was there for one reason only. I stood up. I thanked Mr. Haynes. I thanked Margaret. I thanked Rachel Whitfield for her careful work. I did not thank my aunt. I did not need to thank my cousins. I walked across the small office floor and out into the hall. The truth doesn't always arrive when you want it. It arrives when it's ready. I locked my car and sat for a long moment, both hands resting on the envelope in my lap. The rain had stopped by the time I pulled out of the parking lot. I drove home the long way, past the train station where no one had ever noticed me, and I did not feel the need to be noticed again.